20 years silent, he lifted a bleeding Apache girl from the ditch, hope led back in. The rim of morning barely showed when Caleb turned the wagon off the main track. Frost shivered along the dry canal, tracing every weed in silver. He steered by habit, Salt Run to the trading post, 7 miles east, mule plodding one step slower than the ticking in his head. Halfway to the foothills, the mule balked, ears sharp. Caleb pulled the reins, boots crunching gravel as he dismounted. A shape lay twisted at the ditch bottom, ragged buckskin, dark stain in the dirt. He slid down the embankment, knees in icy mud. The figure was a girl, maybe 18, skin earth-brown beneath dry blood. An arrow shaft jutted from her left side, feathers ruined by night rain. Her eyes opened when he touched her shoulder, black, bright, no plea inside them. Just watching. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse weak but there. For an instant he saw his wife's face in firelight, his son's small boots by the door, and felt the old urge to move on. But the eyes held him steady alive. He broke the arrow at the shaft, wrapped his coat around her shoulders, lifted her. She weighed less than a feed sack, warmth seeping through torn dress into his chest. He carried her to the wagon bed, laid her on folded canvas, covered her with grain sacks that smelled of last year's corn. The mule started at the whip crack, wheels groaned toward home. Frost lingered in the farmyard shade. Houseboards gray as ash, barn door hanging like a broken wing. He eased the wagon beside the loft ramp, slid her onto his arms again. She did not cry out. Only her hand tightened once on his sleeve when pain shifted. Inside the barn, dust held the shape of summer light. He cleared a corner of hay, spread an old blanket. Lamplight found spider silk between rafters, made it silver for one brief moment. He cut away the dress where the wound glistened, purged it with boiled water, packed it with spiderweb gauze, and crushed yarrow. His fingers trembled but never paused. When it was done, he slipped a clean flannel shirt, once his wife's, over her shoulders. Too large, sleeves swallowed her wrists. She watched every motion, breath shallow. No word crossed her lips. He answered with equal silence. By noon, weak sun thawed Frost into mud. Caleb fetched water from the well, left a tin cup within her reach, then retreated to the house. Mule brayed once. Wind answered through cracked porch boards. He boiled beans, ate standing. The house echoed only stove ticks and the distant pulse of his own heartbeat. 15 years of quiet stretched in the gaps. For the first time, they felt thin. He took a second bowl to the barn, set it near her palate. She sat upright now, eyes clear but clouded with pain. Her fingers brushed the rim, then stilled. She waited for him to step back before lifting the spoon. Each bite slow, deliberate. When half the bowl was gone, she set aside, folded hands in her lap, and looked at him as though marking his outline for memory. He dipped his chin, closest thing to welcome he still knew, and left. Night dragged a hard wind through the gully. Caleb woke to the mule's nervous stomp. He lit the lantern, crossed the yard. Inside the barn the girl was on her knees, one palm pressed to the wound, the other braced against dirt. Blood seeped dark again. He knelt, tightened the bandage, whispered the first word spoken on the farm in years. Only a name, Waya, he offered, not knowing if it was hers, only that it meant wolf in a tongue he half remembered from scouts long dead. She blinked once, as if the sound belonged. Then her head bowed, shoulders eased, and she let him lift her back onto the blanket. He stoked a small fire in the pot-belly stove, its glow stroking the rafters. Winter air melted slightly, breath no longer smoked in the beam of the lantern. She slept at last, face open, suspicion uncoiling. He watched until his knees numbed, then set a bucket to catch leak from roof, returned to the house. He lay on the cot, boots still on, lamp dark. Wind rattled loose tin, but another sound floated beneath, the slow, even exhale of a stranger alive in his barn. It filled the distance between shutter and scar, and for the first time in 2 decades, he did not feel alone inside the bones of the night. Outside, Frost began again, lacing the ditch where he'd found her with bright veins that would vanish at dawn. Inside, spiders still trembled above a soft fire, catching the first fragile threads of something that might one day be called hope. Gray dawn seeped through the barn's loose boards, turning dust into slow-moving ghosts. Caleb pushed open the door, kettle in hand, boots muffled by straw. Wyatt lay half upright against a hay bale, the flannel shirt hanging from angular shoulders, eyes awake and watchful. The wound's bandage had bled through in the night. He knelt beside her. No words, just warm water, clean rag, a slow unwinding of the stained strip. The cut oozed dark but steady, no fresh bright red. He crushed yarrow between thumb and palm till its scent filled the space, packed it tight, re-wrapped linen. Her breath hitched once. She met his gaze without flinching. They shared that silence until the kettle spit. By midday, she could sit unassisted. Caleb rigged a sling from grain sack cloth, slipped her arm through, then left a dipper of well water within reach. Outside, he mended the fence, pausing now and again to glance toward the barn door. Smoke rose in a thin, confident line from the potbelly stove. She had found the flint. At sunset, he carried 2 bowls of beans and cornbread into the barn. She was sweeping straw dust into a neat dune, moving slow, conserving pain. She accepted the bowl, waited until he stepped back to his own bale before eating. Halfway through, she set her spoon aside, broke off a corner of cornbread, and slid it across the plank to him, a first returning gesture. He nodded, took it, tasted more salt than bread, and, somehow, gratitude. Night sharpened the temperature. Wind creaked rafters. The mule shifted in its stall. Caleb woke to a muffled thud, found Wyatt limp on her blanket, fever mire in her eyes. He fed the stove to glowing red, mixed willow bark, mint, and the last of his honey in a tin cup. With gentle insistence, he tipped the brew past her lips. Her jaw worked, memories of other medicines flickering behind her stare. Sweat beaded, cooled, and by pre-dawn her breathing slowed to a measured tide. He dozed sitting against the wall, lantern low. Spiderwebs above shivered each time he exhaled. When first light needled through gaps, she slept easier, bandage dry. Morning routine bent to her healing. He hauled water and left it. She, when able, folded the blanket, swept again, organized his scattered tools into rows on a saddle rack. At dusk he found a mule brushed smooth, burrs picked from its mane. A small cluster of wild onion bulbs sat on an overturned feed bucket, her silent offering to supper. They cooked together that evening. She sliced onions with his pocket knife. He stirred beans in the iron pot. Steam rose, blending scents of smoke and earth. When they ate, he noticed her shoulders relax a fraction. The barn walls stopped echoing grief and began to sound like shelter. Before sleep, she pulled a thin cord of rawhide from her wrist, tied it around the broken shaft of the arrow he'd removed, then placed the bundle by the stove, pain coiled, contained. He answered by setting the acorn wrapped in spider silk beside it. 2 tokens under the same low flame. Wind died. They slept, he on a bale near the door, she on her pallet, breaths weaving a soft rope across the gap. Outside, frost found the field, but inside, the barn exhaled warm, almost like a house remembering it once had a heartbeat. Blue steel cold rolled down from the mountains overnight, frosting every furrow stiff as tin. Caleb rose stepped from the porch at first light, boots crunching brittle stalks. Row upon row of corn bowed under silver, leaves frozen mid-curl like fists too tired to open. He tasted the familiar dread of another failed season, until he saw Wyatt standing at the edge of the field, hand skimming frost as if testing a fever. She turned, motioned to the barn. Inside, they worked without speech. Caleb dragged warped fence slats. Wyatt hauled burlap feed sacks and coils of baling wire. They laid the boards as ridges along each row, draped the burlap into low tents, pinning cloth with fist-sized stones. When burlap ran short, she gathered armloads of sagebrush and rabbit bush, wedged them around stalk bases, green scent punching the frozen air. Sun inched up, weak but bright. Steam rose where frost met burlap, and Caleb felt the field exhale. Near noon, she led him past the north paddock to a patch of blackened soil left from an old brush pile. With bare hands, she broke the crust, exposing loam beneath. From a leather pouch, she drew clusters of tiny bulbs. Wild onion, split one with her thumbnail, showed its green heart. He nodded, knelt, and together they pressed bulbs into the warm ash, covered them with damp earth, stamped the spot flat. She traced a small cross in the dirt, then breathed on the mark, sealing hope in the ground. That evening, clouds bruised purple on the western rim, promising another freeze. They carried slats and sacks until dark. Wind sharpened. Inside the house, Wyatt strung pennyroyal and dried sage over the stove, scent thick enough to fight dread. Caleb spooned beans into 2 tin bowls, added a handful of her onion greens. They ate facing the fire, spoons scraping in slow unison, the only sound between them. Night deepened. Corn creaked under the burlap tents, but leaves did not crack. Caleb lay on his cot, eyes open to the rafters. Across the room, Wyatt rested on a pallet near the hearth. Lamplight flickered over her scar, now pale as moonlit bark. Wind clawed the shutters once, but she did not stir. Her breathing stayed steady, guiding his into the same rhythm. Dawn revealed frost clinging everywhere except under their makeshift tents. He lifted one burlap corner, found leaves still supple, stalks upright. The field lived. Wyatt crouched at the onion patch. Tiny green spears already punched through ash. She smiled, not full, but enough to change the air. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, like a knot untied while he slept. She brought out a clay jar, thick sour-smelling of onions, beeswax, and smoke. Together they dabbed the paste on mold-dark spots at each stalk's base, kneeling row by row. When they finished, fingers sticky and fragrant, she rinsed their hands at the pump, pressing his wrists under the stream until cold bit skin clean. Storm clouds gathered again, pregnant with snowmelt. They spent the day mending leaks. He hammered tin scraps over roof holes. She wedged moss and clay into window gaps. By dusk, sleet rattled the walls. Inside, flames roared. She sat cross-legged on the floor, untangling baling twine into tidy coils. He sharpened the scythe, steel singing against stone. Each stroke matched her steady breaths. Thunder boomed once, echo of cannon from long ago. His hand faltered. She looked up, laid twine aside, crossed the room, and rested 2 fingers on his forearm. Silence steadied. Steel resumed its song, smoother now. The storm passed before dawn, leaving earth wet and hungry. Sunrise painted the field gold. Burlap tents steamed, releasing trapped breath of living plants. Caleb pulled the cloth away. Stalks stood taller, edges edged in dew. He called softly, first sound besides her name that had left his mouth in years. It was half laugh, half sigh. She joined him, barefoot, feeling mud ooze between toes. He pointed to the tallest stalk. She plucked a green strip, rolled it between fingers, lifted it to his nose, scent of onion, earth, and morning. He inhaled, felt lungs stretch painless. Back at the porch, she unpacked scraps of colored cloth from an old flour sack. Red as mesa iron, blue as dawn shadow, yellow as rabbit brush bloom. She laid them in patterns, eyes asking. He fetched needle and thread, sat across from her. They stitched, faltering at first, then rhythmic, patch meeting patch until color filled the gray porch like sunrise trapped in fabric. When the quilt grew large enough to cover the pallet she slept on, she folded it, tied it with rawhide, and placed it on his cot instead. He shook his head. She pressed her palm to the quilt, then to his chest. Warmth belongs here. He accepted. That night he slept beneath their shared work. Dreams wandered fields unscarred by fire or frost. In one, he saw Waya walking rows of corn higher than both their heads, a braid of sage in her hand, humming a tune he couldn't hear but felt. He woke to faint music, her soft voice, low, carrying Apache words over the onion plot. He listened from the doorway until the sun cleared the ridge. She saw him, did not stop. Instead, she lifted a bulb, its white root crowned with green, held it toward him. Invitation, plant more. He rolled sleeves, hefted the spade. They turned soil side by side until sweat cut through dawn chill. Each clod broke and felt like a syllable in a language he was just remembering how to speak. When they finished, she cut a sprig of sage, tucked it behind his ear. Laughter ghosted her lips. He brushed mud from her cheek with gloved thumb, gesture clumsy but true. She did not flinch. Evening settled lilac over the hills. 2 mugs cooled on the porch rail, steam twining like twin vines. Wind smelled of wet dirt and new green. Corn leaves rustled, sound of many small hands applauding frost that came, pressed, and passed. Caleb rested a hand on the doorframe, felt the house hum along its beams, a different note than before. Waya hung the patched quilt in the window until morning light could stain the cloth bright. In fading sun, colors glowed like embers that refused to die. Inside, the acorn wrapped in spider silk shared a shelf with the broken arrow bound in rawhide. Seed and wound, root and scar, both waiting for the next season to decide what they become. Night sank early, sky bruised by a moonless front. Wind bulleted across the flats, rattling cornstalk stubble and slamming loose gate boards like warning drums. Inside the house, lamplight rocked on its chain. Walls flexed, traded groans with rafters. Waya set another split oak in the stove, pressed her palm to its iron flank. Heat steady, but outside something pressed harder. A thin, distant bellow cut through the gale. Caleb stiffened. Second cry followed, closer, ragged with hunger. Wolves, winter lean, driven down from the mesas. He unhooked the Spencer rifle that had slept above the lintel since the war, thumbed the action, felt the old scar at his shoulder twitch its warning. Waya laid 2 fingers on the barrel, not to stop, only to steady. Then she crossed to the stove, yanked free a burning brand, plunged its tip into a crock of turpentine-soaked sage and rabbit brush cones she had prepared against sickness, now turned to new use. Flame roared, blue inside orange. She thrust the torch into a bucket of sand, smothering the lower half, so resinous smoke billowed thick and sharp. Another bellow, closer still. Time gone. Coats on, door slammed back. Wind clawed at their faces, sanded skin with grit. Barn lantern swung wild on its hook, throwing crooked shadows across the yard. Cattle milled tight in the pen, eyes like silver marbles. Beyond the fence, movement. Low, gray shapes gliding between sage clumps, breath fogging in ragged exhale. Caleb climbed the corner post, leveled the rifle across the rail. No shot, just presence. Wyatt strode the fence line, planting 3 smoke pots at equal distances. Each hissed up a column of black-white plume, curling into the wind, stinging eyes and noses. First wolf lunged at the rail, teeth flashing. Caleb fired into the frozen dirt a foot wide. Warning crack that split the night, echoed back from empty hills. The pack paused, hackles knife-edged, doubts blown in with the smoke. Wind shifted south, shoved the resin stench straight into their muzzles. Wolves coughed, shook heads, backed 2 paces. One kept forward, hunger stronger than burn. Wyatt stepped between posts, torch held high, chafing a broken arrow wrapped around her other wrist like weighted whip. She slashed the air, sparks fountained. The lingering wolf flinched, ears flat, retreated to the dark mass of its kin. Snow began, dry, whispering. White feathers pasted to smoke, turned night to gauze. Wolves circled wider, unsure where the fence ended, where the fire bit next. A final snap of jaws met another warning shot that whined over their backs. The pack broke, bodies melting into the bleached darkness, paused silent over crusted drifts. Silence followed, broken only by cattle breathing ragged relief and the ticking cool of burnt sage. Caleb lowered the rifle, felt shoulder muscles unclench for the first time since the war's bugles. Wyatt planted the torch upright in snow, watched its last ember wink out, then walked the perimeter once, checking every rail with a palm, as if sealing the ward. Inside, coats steamed above the stove. He cleaned the rifle in ritual strokes. She ground fresh sage to ash, smeared a thin line above the threshold, smoke turned to symbol. No words, only the soft clink of oiled steel and the hush of herb over wood. Later, he poured weak coffee, set 2 mugs near the hearth. Flame wrestled shadows into quiet corners. She took her cup, knees drawn, eyes glossy with reflective fire. He touched the rawhide-bound arrow fragment on the shelf, then the acorn husk, now sprouting a hairline crack, seed waking. Outside, snow thickened, filling wolf prints before wind could remember their shape. Inside, 2 heartbeats steadied, matching the pulse of logs settling into embers. For the first time in 20 winters, the house did not sound afraid of the night. Spring slipped into the valley on fox-quiet paws. Snow retreated to the north gullies. Ice melted from troughs in thin, tinkling sheets. Caleb woke one dawn to the smell of rain on warm dirt and realized he hadn't dreamed of fire or guns in weeks. Corn rose above his knees, burlap long packed away. Wild onions spiked the garden rows, and the bulbs Waya had planted behind the smokehouse pushed lilac flowers through black ash, color where he'd never expected it again. One pale morning, she walked from the barn, carrying the broken arrow wrapped in rawhide. Its shaft, once blood-dark, had been sanded smooth. Feathers gone, point snapped. She held it over the courtyard fire pit Caleb had rebuilt from river stones. With 2 fingers, she signed a circle in the air and dropped the shaft into the coals. Flame caught, racing the splinters, turning war and pain into sweet smoke. Caleb stepped beside her, oak log balanced on his shoulder. He fed the pit until flames rose bright enough to lick the dawn. When the arrow burned to embers, she scooped a coal with forged tongs, carried it inside, and laid it gently in the pot-belly stove as though transplanting a living thing. That night the stove glowed deeper than before. Heat settled into walls that had long known only chill. Days stretched full. They built a lean-to on the south side of the house, neither barn nor bedroom, just a narrow room with a window cut toward sunrise. Wyatt hung the quilt they'd stitched across the new doorway while plaster dried, colors breathing light into the plain pine. Caleb carved shelves from cedar boards and set them under the window. On the top shelf, Wyatt planted the cracked acorn in a clay pot packed with river silt. By the next week, a pale shoot unfurled, tiny leaves bigger each dawn. Evenings turned to soft rituals. 2 mugs hung on the same hook. 2 spoons rested in the same tin pail by the stove. Sometimes Wyatt traced the Apache word Gouda, home, in the dust on the table. Caleb answered by drawing the outline of the farm fence around her letters, then wiping it away, leaving the word free. Rain came heavy one afternoon, drumming the roof in a song neither of them remembered. Caleb watched leaks that used a spider across ceiling boards, but the moss she had packed, the tin patches he'd hammered, held. No drops reached the floor. He found her in the new room, palm flat to the cedar shelf, smiling at the rhythm overhead. He took her wrist, guided her to the center of the room, let the sound wrap them. No dance, only stillness dense as heartwood. Later, at the fire, he cleared his throat, voice rough from long disuse. The word cracked, but she lifted her gaze, waiting gently. I want you here. Single breath, enough. She pressed her fingers to his chest, felt the truth of it under scar tissue, nodded once. Summer's first heat rolled in, stirring cicadas. Corn tasseled tall, casting green light between rows where they worked shoulder to shoulder. When midday burned, they rested in the lean-to, breeze spilling through the open window, the fledgling oak quivering on its shelf. One evening, Caleb returned from the far pasture and found new beads woven into the quilt, tiny glass bits the color of well water. Underneath, a pouch held seeds sorted by her careful fingers. Maize saved from the strongest stalks, wild onion, sage, pennyroyal. Above the bundle a strip of hide bore a charcoal mark, 2 parallel lines touching at one end, then twisting together. A path joined. He set his pocket knife atop the pouch, a gesture without ceremony, blade open, edge bright, handle toward her. Invitation. Carve what you need, change what you must. She closed the blade, slipped it into the pouch, tools and seed side by side, and hung it beneath the quilt where sunlight could find it every morning. The first sunflower bloomed at the barn corner late June, head heavy with golden fire. Wyatt cut 1 petal, tucked it behind Caleb's ear. He laughed, the sound rusty but whole. She laughed too, soft, startled, as if discovering music in her own throat. That night they sat on the step, watching bats flit between stars. Heat from the fire pit drifted across their legs. Her shoulder rested against his. Inside, the stove's single coal glowed steady, a heart transplanted months ago. Wind rustled corn leaves, 1,000 green hands applauding an unseen stage. Caleb's hand found hers, fingers fitting without thought. No vow spoken, no ceremony needed. House, barn, field, and sky bore witness. Silence, once a prison, stretched now as soft quilt across their backs, warm, breathable, wide enough for 2. And if this quiet turning from frost to fire moved you, tap subscribe, drop a like, and let us know in the comments which ember. The frost tints, the wolf fire, or the arrow reduced to ash, burned brightest for you. Your words feed the next seed of story.